So, hello everyone. This is Sven here from OWASP Switzerland. Welcome to another meeting from our side, once again online. With me already in the call or in the presentation is Paddy and Rob, and also our speaker Seba. And also from them, a warm welcome to all of you joining us today. So, for everyone that is not yet familiar with all the projects that we do at the Open Web Application Security Project, I highly recommend that you go to owasp.org and look at all of our projects. And if you feel that they are worthwhile and you can use them, because everything is available as open source and free tools, documentation, and great stuff there. Please consider also supporting us. OWASP is like a non-profit organization. So if you want to support us, please consider becoming a member, either yourself or your company, to support all the projects. I think by now, if I'm not mistaken, we have more than 100 projects, all from really advanced projects that have been in the making for years, down to projects that are really just starting, having one or two people dedicating a lot of time to make application security more visible and make the planet that we live on, in terms of the applications that we use, at least, more secure. So very well spent money, I would say. So please consider becoming a member. So for today, today we will have our presentation once again, as said, online. All of you are currently watching us on our YouTube channel, where you can, on the right side, ask questions. We will answer the questions ideally at the end, unless we see something that is very urgent. If for any reason you think you don't want to use the YouTube chat because you need to be actually authenticated to use it, feel free to go to owasp-switzerland.ch, and there you will find the possibility to also send in anonymously or with any custom name, without any kind of registration, questions, and we will make sure that your question also gets raised, and the presenter can, in the end, give you an answer to all the questions you might have. Please also feel free to send them at any time, so don't wait till the end. If we have too many questions, we might not be able to answer all of them. So the sooner you enter your question, the more likely we actually will get to it and you get an answer to it. And now, without further ado, I say very warm welcomes once again to Seba. Seba will be our speaker today, and he will talk about one of all those great OWASP projects. It's the OWASP SAMM project, and he will tell us a little bit more about it, in terms of what it is, how you can use it, and especially the upcoming version 2.1 and what is new there. So I'm handing over to you, Seba. Thanks for being with us.
All right. Thank you, Sven, and also thank you, Rob and Paddy, for inviting me, but also the OWASP SAMM project to the Switzerland chapter. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to share a couple of slides. There are only 70, so don't be scared. I'm going to skip over them quite quickly, because what I really also want to show is the tools, the input that you really can use to, like we're promising here, bootstrap and increase your software assurance with OWASP SAMM 2.1. So without further ado, let me start. So first of all, myself, so thank you for inviting me. So I'm professionally, already in software security for over 20 years now. I have a background in software engineering and education. I am currently CTO of Torion. It's a company here in Belgium that I co-founded about 8 years ago. We're providing cybersecurity consulting around various topics, obviously also around AppSec. So if you're in need for any AppSec consulting, obviously feel free to reach out. We also acquired a couple of years ago a training company called Data Protection Institute, where I'm heavily involved in building up the training portfolio around data protection, cybersecurity, and data management. Also have a couple of trainings that are related to security, obviously, but also to application security and or threat modeling. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me on through LinkedIn or to our my Torion contact details. Besides, I would say being professionally quite busy with software security and application security, I've also been quite involved in the OWASP community. I've actually also started the chapter here in Belgium in 2005. Been involved in a couple of other activities of OWASP itself, but also now active since probably also more than 10 years now, the OWASP SAMM project. Obviously not alone. This is together with a group of a lot of other people who are working on the SAMM project. So I'm a project co-leader together with Bart de Win, and there's a core team of 10 plus people who are actually involved on a frequent basis. So obviously I'm standing on the shoulder of giants here. With that, what is SAMM? What is it useful for? So OWASP SAMM is one of our flagship projects within the OWASP community, and it's actually a maturity model to assure software assurance, to make sure that you have a way to not only effectively, but also measurably start or improve your software security activities. A lot of our projects within OWASP are focused on testing, on guidelines, on what to do specifically. The assurance model that SAMM is really like what's called a secure development lifecycle framework to help you plan and embed these kind of activities, from governance over requirements, over building secure code, over testing it, to build that into your way of working. And that's actually what SAMM is. It's really like, you can see it, you can regard it as a umbrella project covering a lot of other projects within OWASP. And the big advantages of SAMM is that, one, it makes software security measurable. And there's a great quote that if you can measure it, you can also manage it. And that's really what SAMM makes possible. It makes it also actionable. It provides you with a pathway to actually start it up. Since it's agnostic in terms of technology and process, you can really use it and adapt it to your own kind of organization. So that's really the overall setup of OWASP SAMM. Now, it's definitely not new. It has evolved over a couple of versions. So it's already started and created by Pravir Chandra about more than 12 years ago, 2009. We have taken over that project, which is early on called OpenSAMM, but forked it as an OWASP project later on, and evolved it over the last years towards SAMM 2.0, which actually was released in 2020, so 2 years ago. And we're now working towards OWASP SAMM 2.1. But later on 2.1, I would say I'm going to explain what's in there. It's not released yet, but let me first introduce you to what OWASP SAMM really is about. So SAMM itself is a maturity framework consisting of 5 business functions, governing really activities over like governance, like how do you organize application security activities as part of your development lifecycle, design, implementation, verification activities, and operations of software. And each of these 5 business functions contain a security practice. Within governance, you have strategy and metrics, policy and compliance, and education and guidance. So in design, threat assessment, security requirements, security architecture, and so forth. So in each of these 5 business functions, there's 3 security practices that in themselves are practices that contain activities that you can introduce in your own development lifecycle. It doesn't mean you have to do everything. It doesn't mean you have to do all the activities, but these are really the main placeholders of the activities. And if you split it up, and I'm going to boost it up a little bit more, so there's quite a lot of here, so is that if you see that in governance, there's strategy and metrics, there's two streams: create and promote, and measure and improve. So every security practice has two streams, and these two streams are actually the activities that are part of security practice that you can start to introduce and you can start to improve. For instance, if I'm going to take one security practice, and in this case, I'm going to go for the control verification and the misuse abuse testing. So this is the requirements-driven testing. So as an example, there is two streams, and these streams contain activities that are at a certain level of maturity. So it means that you start typically within security practice requirement-driven testing, there's two streams. One is control verification, the other is misuse and abuse testing. And you're doing them with a certain level of maturity. Now, in SAMM, there's actually 4 levels. Level 0 is you're not doing it. Level 1 is opportunistically, you're finding basic vulnerabilities in this case. Level 2, you're getting better at this. You're aligning this towards your application. So it's more efficient. And level 3 is you feedback from what you have learned into the other activities, and you make sure that you're improving your overall maturity. So it's 3 levels of increasing maturity. You can compare it a little bit with the capability maturity model, but it's simplified. So that's the increasing level of maturity. You have the 2 streams that you have in each security practice. And then you have the activities that make out these streams. So with control verification, you test for standard security controls as a level 1 activity. Level 2, you can derive test cases from known security requirements. So you're tuning it towards your application. Level 3 is you're performing regression testing. So you're making sure that you're redoing this every time and again whenever you introduce new functionality. So that's one stream. And the second stream is more like what I would call the negative testing, while the first stream is the positive testing. You're looking for abuse or scenarios or things where things can potentially go wrong. On the first level, it's like fuzzing. On the second level is doing abuse case testing, and level 3 is denial of service and stress testing. So you see there's an increasing level of maturity there. So, and that's actually how each of these security practices are built up. Now, that's, I would say, the description of what SAMM is. Now, how do you measure these? How are you going to make sure that you are indeed doing these kind of activities? Now, there's an assessment toolbox, and there's assessment questions for each of these streams and activities. If I take one example, for instance, governance, and I'm going to show you later on on the website how this looks like. In governance, you have strategy and metrics, where level 1 really has the objective is to have. Let me show you where that is. So everything really in terms of the model, in terms of OWASP SAMM, is on our website. So owaspsamm.org. If you go there, you'll find it here. So getting started, assess and benchmark. But what you're really going to look for is the model. And the model you're seeing here. So actually what you're seeing here is the same kind of security practices and security strategy and metrics that make up the first security practice within governance. You have the 2 streams: create and promote, and measure and improve. If you're going to look at create and promote, the maturity level 1 activity, there's the benefit. Obviously, you will need to make sure that within your organization, you have an idea of what your security posture is, that you know what your risk profile is, that you align your security activities on that. It's going to be different for a bank or for an e-commerce or for a manufacturer. So you need to align your activities on that. So for each of these maturities, there's a benefit, there's an activity description, and there's the question. And the question here will come back later on in the tools, where the question that relates to reaching our objective is, do you understand within your organization what the risk appetite is for your applications? And then the answer is, well, either you don't, or it might be covering general risk, or it covers your organization-specific risk, which is even better, or it also not only in like covers risk, but also opportunities. So that's the, I would say, the quantitative answer to this question. What's important with SAMM 2.0 is that there is also quality criteria. So it's a quality-based assessment, because for this to answer this question, you also have to meet these quality criteria. And you need to capture that risk appetite from your leadership. It has to be vetted and approved by them. You need to identify the main, not only business, but technical threats to your assets and data. And you need you need to at least have that somewhere persisted in a way that it's accessible to the people that need to have that information. So that is something we introduced with SAMM 2.0, and we have that as quality criteria for each of these levels. So it's not too difficult, and that's actually how SAMM looks like. Now, once you start to do that, and once you're going to actually start this up, you're going to need to have a tool to actually do that. So let me first quickly run you through a quick start guide, because the goal here is not to do like a full training. We have a 1 day or even a 2 day training on OWASP SAMM, but typically you scope what you're going to improve. It's best to start with a team or with a product within your organization that you are going to start SAMM with. You're going to do an assessment. You're going to set a target. You're going to define a plan to close your gap towards the certain maturity level that you think is okay for your scope. Implement the improvement steps to actually start up a couple of activities, and then roll that out using all kinds of tools and methodologies out there from the OWASP community or commercial partners or what have you. That's the steps that you typically use. Now, before going to the next part, I want you to show you the typical tools that are available to do these kind of assessments. So where do you find those? You go to the website here, and you go to the SAMM assessments, and there's a couple of pointers and explanations of how you can do that. There's tools, I would say offline tools. Actually, the tool that's being used the most is Microsoft Excel. So spreadsheets is typically something you're going to use. Now, one word of warning: your target audience for using these toolboxes are the people who are going to set up and improve a secure development program. The idea is not that you're going to send out this spreadsheet towards all your developers and ask them to fill it in. That's not going to work. So you really have to have somebody who can translate what's in that Excel towards questions that are relevant within the scope of each individual team. So I'm going to show you how that spreadsheet works, but there's also alternatives. There's an online version, and there's also tools out there online, like one of the sponsors, Codific, has an online version. And later on, I'm also going to show you an SAMMWise, which is one of the tools that was developed by the team as well. So once you go here to download this Microsoft Excel toolbox, you're going to come into our GitHub repo. So everything that we produce, everything that we show from outside, from that originates from the team, from the project, is in GitHub. Everything, and so if I'm going to show you our GitHub structure as OWASP SAMM, the core model resides there. It's actually a set of YAML files that is automatically they're automatically used to build and generate our website. So if there's anything, typos or things that we need to fix, which we do all the time, this is automatically generated out of those YAML files. So that's how that works. And the rest is for translations, benchmarks, PDF generation, and what have you. Now, to download that spreadsheet that I just wanted to reference, it's always per release. So the latest release, and those always going to point here to the latest release, is 2.0.7 actually. So we're not at 2.1. And this is the spreadsheet. I'm not going to download it here because I already have it open. This is I would say, the toolbox that we have available. And so it contains, so if I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so it contains all kinds of questions that are mapping on our model. And so the security practices that you have there. So you have to understand that this is not something that you're going to do in detail with all your developers at once. But the big advantage is that you can use this as a backend tool to measure your maturity within your scope. It also provides you with a scorecard, with roadmap charts, but also with a way to actually build out your own roadmap. I'm not going to go that far, but if we're going to focus, for instance, on one aspect, maybe let's take training and awareness. That's always an interesting one to start with. So education and guidance is a security practice where one of the first level activities is making sure that everyone who's involved has some basic security development lifecycle training. And so there's criteria here that you need to check. And then you say, okay, maybe at least half of our staff is trained on this. A level 2 activity is that you do training specifically based on their roles and what people are doing in as part of software development. So it might be that you have some, I would say, role-based training, and if you want to go as far as doing level 3 maturity activities, which in most of the cases you don't, there the activity consists of having learning management system, or the question is, do you have a learning management system, and also do you track I would say certifications and so on. So maybe we don't. That's one part of the education and guidance. And how you see that it works is that it automatically starts to create or to rate your maturity level right here. And in your scorecard, it also already starts to go up a little bit here. Obviously, there's nothing else going on here, so it's nothing too exciting here. But once you start to fill in those questions, you'll see that your maturity is going, the assessed maturity level is going to be represented here, and you can use this representation like the spider chart and so on. So that's actually one of the tools that is being used to actually start up and assess your OWASP SAMM maturity, and then based on that, and based on what your scope is, going to set your target and create your roadmap and so on. So that's really how you start up using SAMM and implementing using the tools to implement your SAMM roadmap. So everything is, I would say, underneath our website in the SAMM suite is on our GitHub repo. But I would say from an end user point of view, you should typically be able to get everything from the website. We have the model, we have guidance, we have our community with blogs and so on. We have also regularly organized user days and so on. So that's how SAMM 2.0 currently looks like. But what's happening next? So that's version 2.1. We haven't, so we didn't stop at after we released 2.0 2 years ago. We actually did quite a lot. We did a survey also last year, which I'm going to share some results with, and we delivered quite some exciting extra features and functionality that I'm going to share right now. If in between there's already some questions that are popping up that I maybe can answer right now, Sven, let me know. Otherwise, or shout. Otherwise, I'm going to continue and get the questions at the end. All right. So what we've done last year is we've done a questionnaire to the community at large to find out how SAMM is being used, what went well, what can be improved, and so on. And we had a really massive amount of responses. So we had over 150 participants that provided their input. More than half actually are internal practitioners. Typically, they're using SAMM on a business unit level, and they built this program around SAMM to drive improvements. I'm going to show you a couple of details, not everything. We do have all the details available also in a separate presentation on, and that's available through our website as well. What's interesting to find out is that the overall SAMM maturity level from our respondents that filled it in is about 1.2, which is, I think, reflecting overall the experience that I see in a lot of organizations. So don't, I would say, be discouraged if you're starting or assessing and you're at a low level. A lot of organizations still also have quite some improvements to do, or room for improvement. Which there were also a lot of suggestions to, which I'm going to explain a little bit later on, that people were looking at. And a majority is really looking toward forwards to our SAMM benchmark and how to contribute to that. Suggested improvements that were, there were a lot, and we're still processing quite some details there, but really looking at how to apply SAMM on a team or product level, which I'm going to show you a little bit of I would say, a sneak preview of that. Organizations are, and people are really also looking at mapping SAMM to other standards or frameworks, because, well, you're doing or you're introducing these kind of activities, but you need to comply with ISO standards or NIST standards or others. And then it makes sense to see, okay, if we're aligned on SAMM, what does that mean when we look at these NIST or other standards or frameworks? Really like benchmark and having extra guidance on top of the model were questions that that were raised, and actually that we're also covering. So some elements I want to highlight from the survey. It's interesting to note that more than half are actually internal practitioners that responded, whereas others are external practitioners, and some are subject, I would say, or target of an assessment in the past. If we look at how many SAMM assessments that typically were done by our respondents, is that only about 20% never had done an assessment, but so that means that nearly 80% was or had done this, where the majority had done at least 1 to 5 assessments, some 6 or more, some 11 or 20, or even some respondents had more than 50 assessments. So that's quite huge. If we look at the verticals, there's one question that we need to improve the next time that we do the survey, and also probably quite relevant for the Switzerland chapter. We forgot to include financial services in the standard dropdown, but by calculating the individual, I would say others that filled in financial and so on, we already came up with 19. If we, I would say, also take into account that probably some from the technology would also probably have been financial, there, probably in the top 3 to 5. But I would say organizations that are actively in technology development, that's the majority of industry verticals that are applying OWASP SAMM, followed by healthcare, government, industry, and then financial. So that no big surprises there. In terms of organization size, where SAMM is being used, it really varies between smaller organizations to, I would say, mid-size, between 100 and 1,000 employees, but also really a lot of bigger organizations as well. And even we had 6 respondents that are working at organizations with more than 100,000 employees. So that's, you see, there's quite a nice spread of OWASP SAMM being used in different kinds of organizations. In terms of impact, some of them did only a single impact assessment. Some were involved because they were required, probably as a supplier. Some do it just to measure where they are. The majority, however, really use SAMM to build out a program, to drive improvement. And that's really encouraging. That's also why SAMM was created in the first place. And that's reflected by the respondents. If we look at the overall average score, now we had questions for all the different, I would say, security business functions as well, but the overall score is that between 13% had an overall level of maturity in with SAMM that was below 0.6, so on a scale between 0 and 3. About 1/3 were lower than 1.9. About 40% is between 1.2 and 1.8, and then you have some really high outliers, higher than 1.8 and maybe even higher than 2.4, which is really, really high. So on average, it's about 1.2. And then one of the last questions we also had is, how would you recommend SAMM? And this is like some kind of like net promoter score question. I would say overwhelmingly the majority of respondents would recommend SAMM to a friend or colleague, but being 10 that they would highly recommend it and 0 that they wouldn't recommend it at all. We had some on the lower end, but there are also, I think, a couple of like answers that were a little bit suspicious in a way that I think they were typed in randomly or maybe even wrongly in the fact that they were at 0, but at least we had really high scores on the 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that's a little bit of the survey, a high level overview that we did last year. Now, new content and new aspects that I'm going to introduce here as part of the 2.1, which is soon to be released. So it's not yet released, but some of these materials are already available, is a specific guidance for how to use SAMM for development teams. So if you're in your sprint for when you want to introduce SAMM to your next sprint, how can you do that without like taking into account all the 15 security practices at one and doing it like one big thing? There is a very easy path to do that. And there's a presentation and some training that we're going to create around this, but as a very high level introduction, I'm going to go over this a little bit speedy because it's just like, I would say, a teaser. There's what we call a critical path through SAMM for a development team. And it comes really down to understanding your threats through threat assessment activities, making sure you capture that through requirements, then through secure build and deployments, making sure you test those requirements, and you also apply on a broad scale, a scalable baseline security testing. It means that you need to understand your risk profile. It means that you need to understand threat modeling. It means that you really need to apply risk profiles to your application. You need to understand what those in your application portfolio, which ones are really critical, which ones are maybe less critical, because you're not going to apply all the activities on all the applications. Obviously, you need to understand your threats to threat modeling. Very high level means that to understand what you're building, you create a data flow diagram. You need to understand what can go wrong, either through stride or other threat elicitation, I would say, mechanisms. And then you need to select your countermeasures and learn from that. That's the 4-question framework that is typically used for threat modeling. A very high level, I would say, introduction to that. There's more than enough pointers in the model to help you further with that. Translating that to requirements, and not only internally, but also making sure you cover your suppliers in that. Do control verification, misuse, abuse testing, have a secure build, and so on. Have a secure deployment mechanism, and so on. Perform testing, static testing, dynamic testing. Make sure you do dependency analysis. Make sure that you understand what kind of libraries, frameworks that you're using, because they also contain potential vulnerabilities. And then make sure that you do proper testing, either internally or externally, but make sure that it's being tested by people who have obviously not built it themselves. And then obviously base that on the application risk and compliance drivers. That is a very high level, the critical path. And there's what we call the 5 pillars, making sure you have a policy and compliance framework around that, education and guidance, defect management, make sure you have environment management and operational, I would say, management in place as well. So that's a high level introduction to, I would say, how you can apply SAMM on a development team level, where we're going to produce, I would say, some kind of YouTube videos and a training around that and a couple of workshops in the next couple of months. Besides that, we are also pretty much aware that not everybody is going to use Excel as a tool. So what we've also used or created within team is a single page application that you can either host internally or use from us, which is available through GitHub, obviously. So it's actually one of our core repos here, SAMMwise, which is right here. And it's really that simple. You only need to have Docker running. You start it up, you pull it down, and then you start up your OWASP SAMM SAMM-wise. And SAMM-wise, in essence, and I have it here up and running locally. So if you start it up, it will look like this, with a little bit of an explanation. And then you have your own assessment. And here you have exactly the same kind of questions that we had before. For instance, if you look at education practice or education guidance, do you have employees involved with application development to take SELC training? Yeah, maybe at least half of them. Is it customized? For some of it, you don't have an LMS. So it's exactly the same, just in a, I would say, in a little bit more user-friendly way of I would say exposing these kind of questions and answers. But I would still argue that the best way to capture these kind of like levels and do an assessment is through a workshop where somebody who understands SAMM is going to do this together with the stakeholders within the teams, and that's people that are also involved in governance and operations of your software. So that's how how SAMM-wise works. Something else that we released since 2.0 is the PDF version. So actually, you can now download the PDF version of OWASP SAMM. If you're looking for where to download, if you go to the model, it's a little bit hidden away here in the bottom. We're going to create a resources, some resources part where it's more easily found, and there you can also download SAMM in a PDF version. If you're, I would say, interested in a more offline version, please don't print this. It's 300 pages, so save those trees. But in this way, it's might be interesting to share that internally or to forward that in a different way than through a website. So that is something that was released. And then a couple of other aspects that were released or that we've added is, or the question that we get a lot is, okay, we're looking at adopting SAMM. Do you have more guidance than just the model? Yes, we have. We actually introduced what's called stream guidance. So per stream, we're adding guidance, we're adding references or pointers to OWASP projects, we're adding mappings, we're adding best practice, we're external tools, resources, and so on, dependencies. And I'm also going to show you where you can find that. It's that easy. Just go to the website, to the model. Maybe let's go to education guidance. You have the streams here. So let's maybe go to training and awareness. So you have your different maturity levels here at the top, which we've seen before, your questions. And then if you go to the top of the bottom, stream guidance. And actually how this looks like is it's actually a link to a Google Doc, which you'll open up, which is going to be a read-only document that you can copy for yourself or you can use. And it's going to provide references. For instance, in this case, education guidance. One of the major tools that is really interesting is the OWASP Shop, because it's I would say an on-purpose, I would say insecure web application where you can do testing, awareness, and so on. It's a guinea pig for security tools and really great tool to include in your training. There's the OWASP 10 as I would say an awareness. There's OWASP Security Shepherd, which contains role-based training, the security knowledge framework, and so on, API top 10, and so on. So what we've added is these kind of like projects, but also started to do mappings. For instance, BSIMM 13 has, which is a comparable SDL framework, obviously not from OWASP, has a similar one, which is conducting security awareness training, where these kind of pointers are directly in there. And the idea is that we're going to add these kind of mappings to others, not only BSIMM, but others as well. So that's how you can actually use the guidance. And if you want to contribute, there's also a way to contribute where you just add guidance from yourself, the different kind of things and so on. So if you think there's things missing, feel free to add them. This is all also explained as part of guidance, you guess it, and then stream guidance, where there's an explanation on how this works. So that's one aspect also that we introduced, and that's going to be part of our 2.1 release, but already available. And then one other aspect that one other question that we also got a lot, but now have an easier answer actually than we had in the past is, okay, I'm looking at the OWASP SAMM, I want to introduce this, but I can't do this on my own. Can you recommend me to an organization or company can help us do that? Now, us being, I would say, an open source project, that's quite hard in terms of like saying, okay, you can use this or that. If you would ask me, obviously, Torion would be the best, but that's me answering as a Torion project, I would say CTO, but that's not the best way to do this. So from an OS point of view, we need to have a better answer. So what we've done is we've introduced a page where we list what we call SAMM practitioners. And these are practitioners, organizations that provide assessment, roadmap services, toolings, trainings, and so on. And a big disclaimer, we do have some kind of selection process, which is quite lightweight, but anyone can, I would say, submit their, their candidacy. We don't endorse, recommend, or favor any of these. And the way to get on there is to request to be on there. You just have to have a link to a SAMM-related service offering, and you have to have a backlink. That's the only thing that you really need to have there. So if we look at the SAMM practitioner page, it's under community, practitioners, and here you have the explanation of what I've just explained, who to contact for some services. And there's already a list of organizations. So, and when you click on that, for instance, I'm not just going to click one in particular. This is an OWASP SAMM assessment page from Codific, but in every of these links should link to the SAMM related offering from that particular organization. And we've only recently started this page, like in end of November, and it's a growing list. So each month there's others that are added to this. So if you're offering as an organization these kind of services, or you know of an organization that's not on here, please do inform them of the existence of this, and then we can build out this list and help a lot of other organizations that are looking for help. And so that's something that I also added as well. And then mapping. So one of the questions was, we need more mappings between SAMM. So actually what we did is we started to map the SAMM on NIST SSDF, which was released version 1.1 early this year. We did quite some work together with people from NIST to actually update it to version 2.0 of SAMM, because it contained the old one. And here there is actually a pre-release. And so I'm going to share these slides also afterwards with the gentle people of OWASP Switzerland, so that you can have a look at it. But there is already a NIST to SAMM mapping. So if you're interested, or you need to be compliant with NIST SSDF and you're already doing SAMM, well, this is going to be really useful to map your SSDF practices to SAMM activities. Time is now too short to really go over every detail here, but that's actually what we've been working on, and that's going to be released in the next couple of days, actually. Upcoming mappings are mappings to the ISO standards, 27002, the recent set of controls where there's quite some AppSec activities, actually. BSIMM 13, Microsoft SDL, we have people working on that. The CSF, the 852-53 list of controls, and so on. So that's ongoing. And then last but not least, benchmarking. One of the survey questions is, how important is it for your organization to compare against peers? Now, more than 70% answered like 7 or higher on a score between 0 and 10. So we really made this our #1 priority for this year. And the big, I would say, positive surprise is that more than 70% of the respondents to the survey actually are willing to contribute data for the then benchmark. So we're going to capture on that, and we're going to definitely take people up on their words, and we're going to ask that. It's a benchmark project is already started a couple of years ago, but it's reignited, and it's led by Brian Glass, where we're updating the data model. He's building up the infrastructure to capture data sets. What's important here, obviously, is to make sure that people understand what we're going to do with that. So we're going to provide guidance, not only for individuals, but for practitioners, which is also a key to this. Make sure that it's clear in terms of like what kind of quality and completeness we expect. And that there's also a very clear description of how these data sets are going to be captured in a way that it is anonymized, so that you're not able to reflect back towards the organizations that donated it, and that obviously the reporting and analysis of the results is done in a correct way. We're working towards a minimal viable product, and if you have a data set of SAMM 2.0 or 1.5, preferably 2.0, help us out, reach out to us. We're going to work towards a first deliverable that's going to be a PDF result, a PDF report with analysis of the data sets that we received so far. We have a couple of use cases that are being published. There's documentation on the approach that we're going to share, and we're going to request data and expand the data set and then publish the first SAMM benchmark throughout this year. And that really brings me to the next or the last couple of slides. Obviously, we're doing this for you, for the community. From the project, we're providing the core structure of the model. We have the evaluation model. We have the explanation of the model itself, the activities, and so on, based on community feedback. But we can't do this without you. We really need inputs in terms of extra guidance, reference, supporting tools. There's a lot of people that are actually already doing that, but I'm pretty sure that there's much more room for other people that can actually also do that. So don't hesitate to contribute. So the way, if you're interested in contributing, reach out to us. There is actually a link here, contributing, community contributing. There's different ways on how you can do that. You can do that through testimonials and so on. You can do that to benchmark, helping us out with the GitHub issues. Translations also actually is being translated actively in other languages, including German and French and so on. You can also help a sponsor and so on. So there's definitely room for everyone to help us out with helping us to improve SAMM and make it even better. In terms of communication channels, we have the website. Obviously, that's a little bit, I would say, static. The best way to join us is the OWASP Slack channel. So there's an active OWASP Slack channel, which, not surprisingly, project-SAMM. Here you see what we were up to over the last couple of days. Yesterday, actually, we had our community call. We have Maxim here just releasing the pre-release mapping of SAMM to SSDF and so on. And what's really interesting here is that you have pointers to the website, the GitHub, the Google Drive, YouTube, our discussions, and also our new meetup. So make sure to register there to be informed for any new events. Also, if mail is your thing, we do have some newsletter, which does not, we're not sending out any spam. It's when we have important updates then or events that we want to communicate around that, then obviously feel free to submit your email to our newsletter. This all would not have been possible, obviously, without volunteer help, but also we do use quite some money for our infrastructure and to pay a couple of professional editors and marketeers to support us, and also from time to time to go together physically and to do project sprints. And our sponsors are paying for that, so which we are very grateful for. If you want to support us in money, feel free to contact us. That's highly appreciated. With that, I open it up for questions or feedback. So I hope there's a lot of questions. Sven?
Thank you very much, Seba. So there are definitely questions.
Okay.
So before we go into the questions, Rob asked me to ask you if you can go back maybe to the starting slides, so just that we also can put that back up again.
All right.
And then let's just open up the questions. So I guess the most important question that a lot of people, I guess, have is there an actual release date for the 2.0 version, where basically, I mean, you said for something like this could come in the next few days, week, and so, but like for having the final version 2.1, what is the timeline that we can expect there?
Yes. There is no, I would say, date set in stone yet. And also you have to understand that what I've shown and demonstrated here is actually all part of the 2.1. So it's not that we're going to have like a big bang and releasing new functionality. So it's already in there. There's a couple of aspects that might be in there or not. We have our core team meeting in 2 weeks, actually. And so there we're going to cut off what's going to make it in the version 2.1 or not. And I would say my personal, objective is to have it released by the Global AppSec conference in Dublin next month. So which is, I think it's the 16th or 17th of February, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm aiming for that. But as with any other deadlines, which we've seen in the past, don't be angry if we can't make it, but we'll definitely work towards that.
Yeah. But from what I understand, like if people want to already work with it, it's not like there will be like huge changes in the end. They can work with the current releases and they will be pretty close to what they get in the final version. So don't wait, better start today.
Indeed. Something also I want to make sure you understand as well is that in the framework, in the model itself, there will not be significant changes. So the scoring mechanism and the questions and answers between 2.1 and 2.0 will be similar. So it's not that there will not be a need for upgrading or changing your current maturity levels. That is definitely not the scope of this release. The scope of this release is really adding extra support for your SAMM implementation.
Okay, cool. So another question that we have is like, I mean, you showed that there is a lot of additional information if you want to know how to do, for example, like work on a specific practice, things like that. But being the one that does the, like, let's say, actual assessment and like filling out everything, is there some kind of like guideline or guide on how to basically do everything, how to approach it, things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but not. Well, let me maybe show you a couple of aspects that are definitely of interest. There is on the website itself. If you go to the getting started, there's actually at the bottom here, prepare, assess, set the target, define the plan, implement, roll out. There's quite some information here on how to actually do that, and some guidance on how to do that. Our aim has always been to improve and build upon this. So that is one aspect. Another aspect which is really of interest is that within the Slack channel there is a Google Drive, and in this Google Drive actually there's a lot of information available that people that are going to implement SAMM can already use. So you have some trainings actually here, which have been done in the past, where you can, there's even a train the trainer. But also from time to time, we do also organize trainings, and all the materials and the slides are available here as well.
Okay, great.
So there's quite some information here. It's sometimes a little bit hidden away, but if you want more slides, we have more slides.
Great, thanks. So another thing that I also ask myself, but it seems that also other people are really interested, like from the sizing of the actual assessment that you do, like, is it more like you try to do it on like business units and then have like what they do in the business unit? Is it more suited for doing it for like individual products, or do you recommend to basically apply it to a whole organization and then try to have a maturity level that you can display somewhere for the whole organization? Or how do you say, for example, also like big picture view, or going into what the product owner, how good is their product? How is this like done at scale?
Yeah. This is a question that actually keeps coming back, and we're actually going to add this to our frequently asked questions. And it's funny that you ask it, because if we go to our Slack channel, one of the questions that came up a couple of days ago was here by Chris. In this case, we're just looking at applying SAMM, was planning on answering for the whole org first, but then targeting specific project apps later. Is this the accepted approach? Now, in terms of answers, definitely, well, that is in most of the cases not the best way to do this. It's not so trivial. And what the recommendation here in the Slack channel is, which I would say, subscribe, and which we're going to introduce as part of the frequently asked questions, because it's something we also time and again explain. Start with a small team, with a simple project, understand the process, prove the value of doing this on a smaller scope, learn from them, take those lessons learned, and then try to scale this up towards other teams. So typically what I see is you start up on a team approach, on a team level, typically with a team that is, I would say, friendly, or is working on a release that really requires to have more security to be involved, so that you can demonstrate the use of SAMM on that level, and then from there on build it out towards other teams or other products if they're cross team.
Okay,
So
but it should be in general be applicable for like smaller scopes or bigger scope, and basically you can use the same. So there are no plans, for example, to have like, let's say, different profiles in terms of this is what you measure or what you actually can expect from a single project, for example, compared to what you would assume what you can see for a whole organization or so. It's like really one fits all should work with OWASP.
that is the case. If you're looking, for instance, at the guidance, and that's it. So we might add it as a frequently asked question, but maybe also as a guidance aspect. For instance, there's a couple of years ago, for instance, there was guidance specifically added for agile. So that's also a question we get a lot. Is like, so we're in an agile development, I would say, shop. How do we apply SAMM? And because that's not so straightforward. And so there's a whole explanation on how to do that and how to map certain security activities and streams towards agile. And that is an explanation here on how you can do that, and with some extra explanation and so on how to do that and how to implement that as part of your sprint planning, or I would say feature refinement and so on. So there's a couple of pitfalls also, requirements in stories and so on. So so there's lots of guidance available here on how to implement this in agile, on smaller scopes, on big scopes. But coming back to your first question, in any kind of organization, start small and learn from that, and then based on your lessons learned, start to, I would say, gradually spread it out over your whole organization.
Okay, great. So another question that we have was regarding, like, I would say, validation, because I mean, there are like what kind of controls you want to see, how like what kind of like abuse case they're occurring, but I mean, if, for example, you ask a project manager, do you have documentation? The usual answer is yes, of course we have. And only if you dig deeper, then it actually shows, yeah, I mean, they have something, but it's not actually what you would expect. So how do you, like, as the one that uses OWASP SAMM, how do you make sure that you have like the actual correct values that you put into the toolbox, for example, and not just assume like, yeah, I asked them, they said yes, so everything is great. How do you get like real values there? How do you get people to really be honest?
Yes. The part of the question is in the criteria. Because typically, and I'm going to zoom it up a little bit more, just to make sure that we have everything visible here. So there's two aspects to that question. First and for all, like, what's the objective of the assessment? In most of the cases, the objective of the assessment is to get better at doing what we're doing. So make sure to, when you do this, and typically encourage you to do this in a workshop mode, to make sure that people involved understand this as an action to get better, and it's not just to get a score or to get a higher score. It's a little bit of a different ballgame if it's compliance driven, but let's assume that the first, I would say, scenario or use case is the one. So just saying that, okay, we have the document and saying that is good enough, but you will never reach your objective. So it's always important to reach or to align your question on the objective that you're going to want to reach. So in this case, for instance, if we were looking at education and guidance, and if we're looking at the model in terms of education and guidance, we're going to look at a level 1. We want to make sure that the relevant employees have some basic security awareness, regardless of how you do this, regardless of specifically what kind of documents, trainings, and so you want to make sure that people who touch your code understand what's going to potentially go wrong with your code. And there is an explanation on how you can do that. And there is the question, and you can say, yeah, they have done like a very basic training, but what's key here, and that's the second aspect, is the training or the quality criteria. And the quality criteria should make the people who are going to do the assessment or the involved team should make them more honest. In that, well, the training, it should be repeatable, consistent, available to anyone involved. It should, if it, for instance, on web application, have the latest OWASP Tab 10 involved. It should contain the very basic application security concepts that are listed here. There probably needs to be a sign-off. It needs to be updated or refreshed. And if there's any new people that are coming into your team, well, make sure this kind of training is included in their onboarding process. This kind of quality criteria will make sure that, regardless of how you can answer it, make sure that these kind of questions will make your team and your assessor honest in a way that if you can't meet these quality criteria, well, very simply, if it's not updated in the last 12 months, or if it's not like really including appropriate material, your answer can only be no. Because the process is you first have to check the quality criteria, and only if you meet those, you can answer the question.
Okay, that's definitely very helpful. So what else do we have? Maybe if someone now thinks like, oh yeah, all that Seba told us here sounds good. They have so much effort that was put in, everything. We want to do that, but how much time will we spend on this? Like, I mean, of course, it's like some companies are a little bit more complex than others, but the specific question that we have, like if we would say we have a company doing software development as their like main business, I guess, having 100 employees, so doing SAMM, what is the expected time that is needed, let's say, both for doing the assessment, just from how much time to spend on it, and then also like how long does it take normally from let's do this till you actually have a result? Because I mean, that can also be because of availability, how long it gets to gather data, things like that, of course, widely vary.
Well, I'm going to give you the typical answer. It depends, but there's two aspects in terms of timing. There's going to be the time spent on it, like how much time and effort are you going to implement or use up to set up and improve application security as part of your overall, I would say, time budget. So that's one aspect. And the second is like, okay, how much time is going to, so what's the time frame this is going to take in terms of weeks, months, or years? So maybe start with that first. Typically, starting up a SAMM project or secure development lifecycle program is not something you do overnight. It's introducing change in the way you work. So you will need to go over a couple of iterations. You can't do everything at once. So that's where the roadmap functionality of SAMM is going to be very helpful. So you're gradually going to introduce changes over, I would say, different releases of your SDL program throughout your organization. And from my experience, this can typically take up at least 1 to 3 years before you reach a maturity level that you want to align on, and in iterations of between 3 and 6 months in terms of phased approach. That's on average. You can do this much quicker. Typically, if you have an incident or you have a lot of budgets, you can do this much quicker. If you don't have that, it will be slower.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the second aspect in terms of volume, how much impact do you expect this will have on your overall workload? I would say as a rule of thumb, I would say the number of hours or the budget you spend on software, take about between 5 and 10% that you typically, I would say, need to assign to security at large, including tooling, man hours, resources internally, externally. It will be a little bit higher when you start it up, but depending on your risk profile, probably between 5 and 10% of your overall, I would say, software budget should go to securing it, which typically is already in there, but it's typically hidden by fixing vulnerabilities afterwards, so doing pen testing and so on. But by moving those kind of activities and that kind of budget more in a more what we call shift left approach into earlier activities, you have a bigger bang for the buck. You have more leverage of your budgets.
Definitely. So, I guess we should slowly wrap up. Let's see what else we have. So, yeah, maybe this one is an interesting one. So we're showing the critical path, which is, let's say, simply to say like a subset of the overall thing. So, would you say is it like a good idea to like just go for the critical path and say like, yeah, at least we get things started, so let's do that first? Or would you rather say like, if you have the resources, if you can do it, not like minimize? So I would say that could be compared, for example, to companies that say, yeah, let's start with OWASP top 10, but then once they actually like have something where they say, yeah, we looked at OWASP top 10, now security is done. What would you say? Is it like, if you really want to invest in application security, does it make sense to go the whole and address the whole thing? Or would you say it's a good start to first start with the critical path and then let's see if you ever expand from that or not?
Mhm. Um, Well, the critical part actually was introduced by John DeLeo a couple of years ago as part of a presentation, and the scope of that presentation, also the scope you have to understand what we call here the critical part. This is not some kind of like some light or like if you only need can do these. This is actually these are the kind of activities that a development team is going to be involved the most. So this is explaining SAMM to a development team how they can expect to be involved sooner or later as part of their development activities. So they're going to be involved in threat modeling. They're going to have some security requirements, obviously building and deploying, and then testing in terms of requirements and pen testing. So those are the I would say, if you're going to explain this to a development team and say, okay, what are the typical touch points that we're going to have? These are the ones
No.
in terms of critical path. It doesn't say or doesn't mean you don't do everything else because you will need those, and hence what's called the 5 pillars. But it's because those will support this critical part. But it's just to explain towards a development team like, you don't have to bother about all these security practices. It's not your job to come up with a policy and compliance, I would say, activities. It's probably somebody else's job. But probably you're going to be involved in these kind of security practices.
Okay, great. So then I would say one last question before we finish for today. So it's really great to see that there are so many questions coming in. So just to let you know, so most of the time it's actually that we really have to say, hey, if you have more questions, please bring them, and then they come in slowly. But yeah, we get more and more. So I guess it definitely, I would recommend that if people would feel like, oh yeah, I have more questions or not, look at all the material that is out there or reach out to Seba. I mean, like, there are definitely more things to learn about OWASP SAMM than one can just tell about in close to an hour. So last thing, you talked about the mappings that you were doing, and the mappings are like quite a big change that you introduced in terms of like how it's like expanding into more and more directions, like for example with NIST. Are there other mappings in the pipeline, like mentioned was, for example, the sys controls 8 or salsa, so for more the terms of supply chains, things like that, or what kind is or of mappings are there in the pipeline?
Well, there's always, I would say, a big need for other mappings. What I would say is that if you're involved in assist controls deployment or salsa, I would say related project, and you see there is a link to SAMM, feel free to share that with us. We can include that in mappings. We specifically chose the SSDF as, I would say, a guinea pig because it's one that certainly within the US scope for any, I would say, software supplier to the federal I would say government needs to abide to. So it makes sense to have that kind of mapping. And once we have that basic mapping, which is already there, it becomes easier to add other mappings as well. And what's currently in I would say in our pipeline is what I've shown you here. So it's the ISO 27000, the BSIMM, which are actually, I know a couple of people are working on. Microsoft SDL is actively being developed in terms of mapping. So I would expect these kind of mappings to be there in the next, it's next couple of months, not going to say weeks. And then CSF and it's certainly 1853 because that's a beast in itself. Then we're going to see if that's going to be workable for this year or not.
Okay, then I would say we finish up here. So Seba, thanks again for the presentation. Oh yeah, sure.
Maybe sorry to interrupt you. If you have any, I would say, follow-up questions, the best way to get in touch to us is actually the getting in touch with us is to join our SAMM Slack channel. So if any of the questions you had is not answered, you can join directly. If you don't have an invitation or you're not on the Slack workspace yet, there's an invite link here. And then just introduce yourself here or ask your question here, either to the project SAMM. If that is not an option, feel free to reach out to me or to the info, I would say, at owaspsamm.org or Seba at owasp.org.
Great. Again, Seba, thanks a lot for being with us today, for the great presentation, for answering all the questions, and also thanks for everyone that joined in today and your interest. And I really hope this increases the footprint that OWASP SAMM has further. I really also myself used it already in the past, so I really think it's one of the best projects that currently is part of OWASP. It's very helpful, so I can also myself only recommend that people look at it. So thanks a lot, and then I wish everyone a great evening, or depending whatever time it is from where you're joining, as it's online. But everyone have a great time, and we will definitely be back with other OWASP events from OWASP Switzerland. Thanks everyone, and